12 men stood in Ada Calloway's yard that November morning, and not one of them looked at the fence she needed mending. She stood on the porch with her shoulders squared and her hands folded in front of her apron, watching them shift their boots in the frozen mud, watching them trade glances that said they had already decided this was a widow's failing proposition, and they were only here out of boredom, or spite, or both. The cold came off the Bitterroot range and cut straight through her wool shawl. She did not reach up to pull it tighter. She had learned that small movements of comfort read as weakness to men who were already measuring her acreage with their eyes. The contract was simple. She had written it herself on good paper, in her own clear hand. Whoever signed it would spend the winter months, November through the first thaw of March, working the Callaway spread outside the town of Harlow, Montana. They would keep the stock fed, the roof sound, the water line from freezing, the woodpile tall. In return, they would receive a room in the bunkhouse, 3 meals a day, and $40 paid on the 1st of April. It was fair. It was more than fair. A man with a strong back and 4 good months of work could carry $40 into spring and start the season ahead. She had posted the notice at Halverson's General Store on a Monday. By Wednesday, she had 12 names on her door, and every last one of them had heard that Clarence Callaway had been dead 14 months and that his widow was alone on 260 acres with no male kin closer than Billings. She was 34 years old. She had dark hair going silver at the temples and green eyes that did not soften for politeness, and she had heard every version of the speech she was about to hear again this morning, the speech that began with a reasonable offer and ended somewhere near the suggestion that a contract was an awful lot of formality between neighbors. She unfolded the paper. "I'll read the terms once," she said, "questions after." Behind her, the door opened a crack. That was her daughter Nora, 8 years old and incapable of staying inside when something interesting was happening. Ada did not turn around. The first man, a large fellow named Grissom, cleared his throat and said the terms sounded reasonable, but $40 seemed thin for winter labor, and perhaps they could work out something more flexible. Ada looked at him without expression. Flexible, in her experience, meant whatever the man decided it meant come April. $40, she said, 1st of April, no flexibility. 3 men left before she finished the sentence. She looked out past the remaining 9, past the fence that leaned, past the bare cottonwoods along the creek bed, past all of it to the road, where a figure stood at the edge of her property line, hat in hand, not having come up the path with the others. He had not crowded into her yard. He had stopped at the boundary and waited. She had not invited him. She did not know him. But he was standing at the edge of her land like a man who understood that a line meant something. The air smelled of coming snow. November in Montana was not a suggestion. She folded the paper again and set it on the porch rail. "Give me the morning," she told the 9. "I'll send word to Halverson's by noon." She stepped inside and closed the door. Nora was right there, pressed against the wall beside the window, her dark braid over one shoulder and her boots untied. Ada opened her mouth to scold her for eavesdropping, but Nora pointed through the glass.
"Mama,"
she said,
"that one didn't come in the yard."
Ada looked. The man was still there at the road, still holding his hat.
"No," Ada said, "he didn't."
Nora slipped around her, pushed the door open, and ran down the porch steps before Ada could catch her arm. The child crossed the frozen yard at a full sprint, and Ada watched through the glass as her daughter stopped in front of the stranger and held up the contract paper that had been sitting on the porch rail. He crouched down to her level. He read it carefully. He looked up once toward the porch, and Ada could not read his face at the distance, only the steadiness of it. He stood. He took the paper. He walked up the path. Ada pulled her shawl tighter. She had not meant to do it. She did it anyway. His name was Wyatt Marsh. He was 38, broad through the shoulders, lean otherwise, with hands that showed years of fence wire and axe work, and the particular roughness of a man who had wintered outside more than once. He came onto the porch without invitation but stopped 2 paces from the door, which was the correct distance, and held the contract out toward her. "I can meet every term," he said. His voice was low and unhurried, the kind that did not raise itself to impress anyone. "And I'd add one of my own if you're agreeable." She took the paper back from him. "What term?" "I'll mend the south fence before the ground freezes solid. No charge for it. It's a safety issue. You shouldn't go into winter with a fence that won't hold." She studied him. She was looking for the angle, the way she always looked for the angle. Grissom had come with flattery. The man before him had come with a story about a sick mother in Spokane, as though that should move her price. This one had come with a fence. "You have experience wintering cattle?" she asked. 10 years. Wyoming, then up through the Judith Basin. References. He reached into his coat pocket and produced a folded letter. She opened it. It was from a rancher named Hollis Crane in Lewistown, written in the square, honest hand of a man who did not write letters often, and so meant every word. It said Wyatt Marsh worked hard, kept his word, did not drink past reason, and was the kind of man you wanted between your stock and a bad winter. Ada looked up. Nora was standing at her elbow, looking at the man with frank appraisal, the way only children could manage without rudeness. "Do you know how to make biscuits?" Nora asked. Wyatt Marsh looked at the child with the same steady attention he had given the contract. "I do," he said. "Mine lean a little flat, but they're warm." Nora looked at her mother. Ada looked at the letter in her hand, at the fence in the distance, at the heavy sky that would deliver snow before nightfall. "You'll bunk in the outbuilding," she said. "I've set it up decent. Stove works. You'll eat at the kitchen table. I won't run meals out in the cold. You knock before you come in. You address me as Mrs. Calloway. Those terms are not in the contract, but they're non-negotiable." "Understood," he said. "The contract pays $40 on April 1st. If you leave before March, you take nothing." "I won't leave before March." She handed him a pen from her apron pocket. He signed his name at the bottom of the page. His signature was plain and clear and did not sprawl. "One more thing," Ada said, and her voice was level, because she had learned that the only way to say the hard thing was to say it plainly. "This is a work arrangement. I'm not looking for anything else, and I won't entertain suggestions to the contrary." Wyatt Marsh met her eyes. He did not look offended. He did not look amused. He looked like a man receiving accurate information and storing it properly. "Mrs. Calloway," he said, "I came for the work. That's all I came for." She believed him. She was not sure why, except that a man with a forged reason for being somewhere generally walked all the way up to your door. "Then we have a contract," she said. She turned and went inside. She did not look back to see if he was still watching, because that was not the kind of woman she had decided to be. The snow came that night, exactly as the sky had promised, and by morning 6 inches lay across the Calloway spread in silence. Ada rose before light as she always did, stoked the kitchen stove, and stood at the window with her first cup of coffee watching the gray come in from the east. She half expected to find the bunkhouse dark, to find his tracks leading back to the road, because that was the version of events she had prepared for. The bunkhouse stove was lit. She could see the smoke from the tin chimney, steady and thin in the cold air, and before she had finished her coffee, she saw him come out of the outbuilding in the half-dark, cross to the barn, and go in. She heard nothing from where she stood, but 20 minutes later she heard him in the corral, breaking the ice on the water trough with a long-handled bar. He worked without noise, and without hurry, and without any performance of effort meant for her to see. She made a second cup of coffee. She put it in a tin mug and set it on the porch rail before she could talk herself out of it. Nora appeared at her elbow again. The child had the unnerving habit of materializing without sound. "Is he staying?" Nora asked. "He signed the contract." "That's not what I asked." Ada looked down at her daughter. Nora looked back with the clear eyes of a child who had been watching adults manage hard truths her whole life and had developed an allergy to evasion. "He's staying," Ada said. The first week was a study in boundaries observed. Wyatt ate his breakfast at the kitchen table in silence, or near enough to it. He said please and thank you and not much else. He did not linger after meals. He took his plate to the basin without being asked, and he scraped it clean, which told her something about where he had come from and what shortage felt like. He found the south fence the first afternoon and spent 3 days on it, working in cold that dropped to single digits by midday, and when he was done, the line was tight and true and would hold through any winter Ada had seen in Montana. He did not explain the work. He did not report it to her like a man waiting for praise. He simply did it and then moved to the next thing. The next thing was the roof seam over the kitchen, which had been weeping cold air down the east wall since October. Ada had known about it and had been putting it off because climbing that pitch in November was dangerous, and she had nobody to spot the ladder. She came out one morning to find him up there with a bucket of pitch and a rag, working the seam methodically, and she stood in the yard looking up with her heart doing something complicated and inconvenient. "You could have asked," she said. He looked down from the roof. "Would you have let me do it?" She thought about that for a moment. Probably not until January. January would have been too late, he said, and went back to the pitch. That was the shape of the early weeks. Him seeing what needed doing. Her adjusting to the fact that the seeing was not an intrusion but a form of attention she had not received in a long time, and which she did not know how to receive without her back going up first. Nora had no such difficulty. Children bypassed the complicated machinery of adult caution and went straight to the useful truth. And the useful truth Nora had arrived at by the second week was that Wyatt Marsh knew how to play checkers, could whistle 4 different bird songs, and would answer any question she put to him with the same steady seriousness he gave to everything else. She asked him once why he had stopped at the road instead of coming into the yard with the other men. He thought about the question as though it deserved thinking about. "Because it wasn't my yard yet," he said. Nora chewed on this. "But now it's your yard a little bit?" she asked. "Now I work here," he said. "That's different. That's something I earned." Ada heard this from the kitchen doorway and turned back to her stove without saying anything. December brought cold that was not the sharp, clean cold of November, but the deep, grinding cold that settled into the bones of the land and did not lift. The creek froze in the second week, and Wyatt cut a water hole in it every morning and covered it with boards between trips to slow the freeze. He moved the older cows into the barn and distributed the hay in a system that Ada had not seen before but which proved efficient in ways she could track by how little they were going through the stored feed. She said nothing about this. She watched. She had a way of watching that she had developed over 14 months of managing alone. She tracked information the way a captain tracks weather. She had learned to read wind shifts in the behavior of her stock, to see the first signs of a sick cow and how it stood at the trough, to hear in the quality of silence around the homestead whether something was wrong or whether things were, for the moment, holding together. She applied this same attention to Wyatt Marsh, and what she read in him was consistency. He was the same man at 6 in the morning in the dark and the cold as he was at noon and as he was at supper. He did not have a company version of himself that he put on for her benefit. She found this, unexpectedly, to be the most disarming thing about him. The trouble arrived from the south, which was the direction trouble in Harlow generally came from. A land agent named Pruitt had been working the valley since September, representing a cattle concern out of Billings that was assembling parcels along the creek drainage. He had bought out 2 smaller operations and was moving up the line. Ada had received a letter from him in October. a polite letter that used words like fair market value and mutual benefit, and concluded with an offer that was neither fair nor particularly market rate for 260 irrigated acres with water rights. She had written back a single sentence: "The Callaway property is not for sale." Pruitt had not written again. But in December she heard from Eleanor Voss at the Mercantile that Pruitt had been talking around town about the Callaway widows' situation, using words like overextended and unsustainable, which were his way of making the story into something it wasn't. The story he was making was that she couldn't hold the place, and he was laying the groundwork with the community so that when he came back in spring with a lower offer, the town would shrug because everyone had already half believed it. Ada told none of this to Wyatt. It was not his problem. He had a contract for labor, not for fighting her battles. She was wrong about that, as it turned out. Pruitt arrived on a Thursday in the third week of December, in a buckboard with a second man she didn't know, and he came to the front door instead of the yard gate, which was an aggression of a small kind. Ada answered the door herself. She listened to his revised offer, which was even lower than the first, and she said the same thing she had written in October: "Not for sale." Pruitt smiled with his mouth only and began to speak about the difficulty of a woman alone managing a spread of this size through a hard winter, and Ada felt the particular cold fury she had learned to keep below the surface because showing it gave men like Pruitt something to talk about later. She did not have to answer. Behind Pruitt, from the direction of the barn, Wyatt came across the yard. He had a fence tool in his hand and his coat open despite the cold, and he moved at an easy pace that was not in any hurry, but was also not stopping. He came to stand at the bottom of the porch steps, which put him roughly between Ada and Pruitt's buckboard, and he said nothing for a moment. He looked at Pruitt. He looked at the man beside him. He looked back at Pruitt. "Mrs. Callaway," he said without turning around, "you need anything from me?" "No," she said. Mr. Pruitt was just leaving. Pruitt looked at Wyatt. He took in the fence tool and the width of the shoulders, and the particular quality of stillness that a man has when he is not nervous and not performing, and has made peace with whatever might be necessary. Pruitt looked back at Ada. "Spring will come," Pruitt said. It was meant as a threat. It landed as a fact. "It always does," Ada said. Pruitt got in his buckboard. His companion climbed up beside him. They drove back down the road, and Ada watched them go until they were past the tree line. She turned. Wyatt had not moved from the bottom step. "I didn't need the intervention," she said. Her voice was neutral. She was deciding how she felt about it. "No," he said, "you didn't. I just came over to get a drink of water." She looked at him. He was not smiling. He was not asking for credit. He met her eyes with the same level attention he gave to everything, and after a moment, Ada felt something in her chest that she recognized as the precise sensation of a wall developing a small crack in it. "There's water in the kitchen," she said. "Come in." He came in. He stood in her kitchen, which was the warmest room in the house, and he drank a cup of water at the table, and Nora came in from wherever she had been, and sat across from him, and immediately began explaining a problem she was having with a checkers strategy, and Ada stood at the stove with her back to both of them, and stirred the stew that did not need stirring. She listened to him explain the checkers strategy to Nora in the same patient voice he used for everything, and she thought about how the kitchen had sounded for the past 14 months, and she thought about how it sounded now, and she did not reach any conclusions yet, but she stopped pretending the difference wasn't there. January was the hardest month, and it tested everything. The temperature dropped to 20 below for a week in the middle of the month, and the wind came with it, the kind of wind that turned 20 below into something that felt like the end of the world. 3 of her young steers found a weakness in the north fence line that Wyatt had not yet reached and got out into the timber, and he spent an entire day tracking them in that cold, coming back at dusk with all three, and with his coat frozen stiff and his face the color of old ash. Ada had hot water ready. She had dry clothes from the bunkhouse folded by the kitchen stove. She had the stew on and the bread warming, and she said nothing about any of it, only gestured to the chair nearest the fire and set the bowl in front of him. He sat and ate without speaking for a long time. "Thank you," he said finally. The stew was already made. "I know," he said. "Thank you." She sat down across from him with her own cup of coffee, something she had not done before, eating at the same time as him. She had always found a reason to stand. She was not sure when she had decided to stop finding that reason, but here she was, sitting at her own table across from the man she had hired, in the warmest hour of the coldest day of the winter, and it felt, unexpectedly, like something she had been walking toward for a long time. "Wyatt," she said. She had not used his given name before. She heard it land between them. He looked up. "Why Harlow?" she asked. "You came out of Lewistown. You could have wintered anywhere between there and Miles City." He looked at his bowl for a moment. "I needed something to be responsible for," he said. "Not just work. A place. Something that mattered to whether it made it through." She understood that. She understood it the way you understand something that lives in the same part of you that doesn't have words for itself. "The creek's going to flood in the thaw," she said. "The bank near the south pasture erodes every spring. Clarence meant to build it up and never did." "I saw it," he said. "I was thinking a rock course along the low side would hold it." "That's what I was thinking," she said. He looked at her, and she looked at him, and neither of them said anything about what they were actually talking about, because neither of them was ready for that yet, and they had time. For the first time since November, she was not thinking about the length of the winter. She was thinking about March and what came after. February turned slowly, the way Montana February does, giving nothing up easily. The cold held. The woodpile went down steadily, and Wyatt brought it back up steadily. The stock weathered it. The roof held. The water line from the well to the house, a buried pipe that had been on the edge of freezing since December, held, because Wyatt had dug down and wrapped it in the second week of January, in the dark of an early morning without telling her, and she only found out when Eleanor Voss asked at the Mercantile if she'd had trouble with her pipes, and Ada said she hadn't, and Eleanor looked surprised. Ada knew then. She drove home thinking about the hours he must have spent on frozen ground in the dark, so that she would have water in the kitchen in the morning, so Nora would have water for washing. He had done it with no audience, no credit, no mention. She thought about what Hollis Crane had written in that letter. "The kind of man you want between your stock and a bad winter." She thought Hollis Crane had not said the half of it. On a Saturday in late February, when the light changed in the way that light in Montana changes before spring, shifting from white to something faintly gold, Ada brought the second kitchen chair out to the porch in the late afternoon. She had 2 chairs in the kitchen, had always had 2, but she had been taking her evening coffee alone inside, and she had not asked him to sit with her. She put both chairs on the porch and sat in one, and put her coffee on the rail. Wyatt came out of the barn and saw her. He stopped. He looked at the 2 chairs. He looked at her. She did not say anything, because she had already said it by carrying the chair out, and they were both fluent, by now, in the language of doing the thing without saying it. He washed his hands at the pump and came to the porch and sat in the second chair. They sat in the last of the winter light and drank their coffee. The mountains caught the gold. The creek, thawing now at the edges, made a sound that was the first sound of spring. Nora came out and sat on the top step with her doll and did not say a word, which, for Nora, was its own kind of reverence. "April 1st is 3 weeks out," Ada said. "It is," Wyatt said. She held her cup in both hands. The cold was still there, but it was losing its conviction. "I was thinking," she said, "the bank work on the south pasture, that's not a one-person job." "No," he said, "it isn't." "There's a minister in Harlow," she said. "Reverend Hatch, plain-spoken man. He doesn't make occasions out of things that don't require them." Wyatt was quiet for a moment. He turned his cup in his hands. "You saying you want a different kind of contract? I'm saying $40 on April 1st seems like the wrong ending to a winter," she said. "And I'm saying I've been thinking about it since January, and I'm not the kind of woman who talks herself into things that aren't true. So when I say it, I mean it." Wyatt set his cup on the rail. He looked out at the mountains the same way she did, the way people look at something that has been there longer than their troubles and will be there after. "I came here for work," he said. "That part was true. I know. But I'd stay for different reasons now." He said it plainly, without ornament, the way he said everything. "If you're asking." She turned to look at him. He looked back. He was not performing certainty. He was simply certain, which was different and better. "I'm asking," she said. Nora turned around on the step and looked at them both with an expression that said she had been expecting this development for approximately 6 weeks and was glad somebody had finally gotten around to it. "Does Reverend Hatch do Saturday services?" she asked. Ada pressed her mouth together. Wyatt's eyes moved with something warm and almost laughing. "Almost." "He does," Ada said. "Good," said Nora, and turned back to her doll. Reverend Hatch was indeed a plain-spoken man, and he performed the ceremony on a Saturday in the first week of March with Eleanor Voss and her husband as witnesses, and Nora standing beside her mother, with her braid done up with the blue ribbon that had been Ada's mother's. The preacher said the words that needed saying and did not add flourishes, and when he was done, Wyatt looked at Ada with the same steady attention he had given her on that first November morning, except that something in his face had opened that had not been opened before, and Ada thought that this was what a man looked like when he had stopped waiting to be sent away. Pruitt's letter arrived in the second week of March, his spring offer as Ada had predicted. She read it at the kitchen table. She passed it to Wyatt. He read it. He set it on the table. "What do you want to do?" he asked. Not what should they do. What did she want? She took the letter back and wrote her answer on the bottom of Pruitt's own page and sealed it in his envelope. She handed it to Eleanor Voss the next morning to put in the post. The letter said, "The Callaway property is not for sale. It is the Marsh property now as well, and it will not be for sale then either. The South Bank work went well in April. Wyatt was right about the rock course. She was right about where to start it. Between them, working from opposite ends toward the middle on a Wednesday morning with the sun finally doing something more than suggesting warmth, they finished it by afternoon, and the creek ran through clean and contained, and the south pasture was safe. She handed him a cup of water from the pail. Their fingers touched on the handle, and neither of them moved away from it. The mountains stood to the west in the kind of blue that only comes when winter is truly gone, and the cottonwoods along the creek were putting out their first small leaves, pale green and trembling in the easy wind. $40, Ada said. "I still owe you $40. "You do," he said. He was smiling. It was the first time she had seen him smile all the way, without holding it back, and it changed his whole face into something she realized she wanted to see every day for a long time. "April 1st came and went," she said. "It did. I'll have to find another way to settle the debt." He looked at her, standing there in the April light with the creek behind her, and the mud on her boots and the color coming into her face, and he said, "I think we're probably even." She took the cup back. She looked at him. She thought about 12 men in her yard on a November morning, and one man at the road with his hat in his hand, waiting at the boundary because it wasn't his yard yet. "Not yet," she said, "but we're getting there." There is something worth remembering in this story, and it is this. A contract is only paper, but what two people do inside of one can become something that lasts a lifetime. Ada did not hire Wyatt to love her. She hired him to keep the water running and the roof sound and the stock alive through a hard winter. He did all of that, but he also did something that no contract required. He showed up the same every day, in the cold and the dark and the thankless middle of things, and let her see over time that he was not going anywhere. That is a rare and valuable thing. And she, for her part, learned to stop holding her walls so high that they kept out more than they protected. That is also a rare and valuable thing. Sometimes the bravest act is not crossing a storm but carrying the second chair out to the porch and sitting down in it, and letting whatever comes, come. If this story puts you in mind of something, of a hard season you weathered, or a quiet act of care someone showed you when you needed it most, we would love to hear about it in the comments. What is the thing someone did for you, not because they had to, but because they chose to? Tell us, and if you would like more stories from the Old West, stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things for love and for the land, please subscribe and join us for every new journey. We will be here, keeping the lamp on. Good night. God bless you and yours, wherever you are.